Good afternoon. I'd like to call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of the Oklahoma City Board of Adjustment for March 15th. Before we get started, if you have your cell phones, if you could turn those to silent for us, that would be much appreciated. And also, if you are signed up to speak or you want to sign up to speak, there's a little slip of paper out there that you can fill out and provide to Cindy, and we'll make sure we'll call you when the item's to be heard. When you come to the podium, if you would, be sure and give us your name and address for the record and make sure when you're talking you're doing it in the microphone. So with that, our first order of business is to receive the minutes of the February 15th meeting.
I move to receive the minutes of the February 15th meeting.
I second.
I have a motion and a second to receive the minutes. Please cast your votes, please. And the minutes are received. Next item is continuance or withdrawal requests from staff.
We have a request for item number 9, case number 14451, to defer to April 5th.
I did have someone who had signed up to speak on that item. I'm assuming you just want to make sure it's continued. Is that correct? Correct. Okay. With that, I'll take a motion.
Make a motion to move case number 14451 to the date is April 5th. April 5th.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue case number 14451 to the April 5th, 2018 meeting. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is continued to April the 5th.
We have item number 1, case number 14441, request for a variance to permit primary access from an alley instead of a private or public street into DBD Downtown Business District, located at 25 and 29 Northeast 7th Street.
Is the applicant present? Go ahead and come forward and give us your name and address for the record and tell us about your application.
Cheryl Willingham, 5016 Deerfield Drive. I'm sorry, what did you want to...
You could just, if you would, just tell us about your application.
We want to construct 6 single residential family units on those 3 lots and have access for the back properties to be from the alley.
I would point out to the members of the board that the case was heard before the Downtown Design Review Committee on February 15th, and that was recommended for approval, as I was told. So, any questions for the applicant?
I said questions. The alley improvements would be made by you?
Yes, that would be borne by me.
Okay.
And you've got to make those in accordance with,
Yes.
they're required to make those in accordance with the city specifications there, yeah. Okay. Other questions of the applicant? Is there anyone else who wanted to be heard on this item today? If not, unless there's other discussion, I'll take a motion.
I'll move the approval of item number 14441 for the reasons that they meet all the satisfied requirements for a variance. Also, I listened to the hearing, and it was well presented. It's a very good project.
Oh, thank you.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the variance for case number 14441. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you.
Item number 2, case number 14446, request for a variance to the required sidewalk along an arterial street in the I-1 Light Industrial District, located at 9526 South Shields Boulevard.
Vida Ostovar, 9526 South Shields Boulevard.
Okay. Tell us about your application.
Well, there is a storm sewer ditch in front of our car lot, and the city is requesting to build a sidewalk. And on the west of that ditch, it's too close to the street to build a sidewalk, and it's too close to the ditch. So it is not safe to build a sidewalk there. It's a safety concern.
Are those drainage improvements, the rock and the concrete drainage channel and all that, is that stuff that you guys did, or was that stuff that existed when you purchased it?
No, those those rocks were there.
Okay. Board members, questions of the applicant? Is there anybody else who wants to be heard on this item today? What I will say, a couple of comments that I have from the application we were provided is, one, Public Works has commented that there should be the sidewalk should be installed, or a fee in lieu of sidewalk should be submitted. It's knowledge I have on the advice of our council that we cannot yet impose a fee in lieu of sidewalk if there's not a specific project. And to my knowledge, from the staff report, and I wasn't provided otherwise, there is not a specific project here. So we can't actually impose a fee in lieu of on the sidewalk request. I would also say that one of the things that we pretty commonly say on these applications is that the city here has been very kind to us legislatively and given us a pretty clear directive that sidewalks are really to be built. The instances where they're not is when there are examples of a safety concern for people who would actually be traversing the property, or unimproved bar ditch areas where it's, clearly putting a sidewalk in is not as easy as it would be for a lot of other street fronts. And I think this area, I looked at this, I actually drove by this property. This was supposed to be heard on a prior case, and I had driven it before. Pretty clearly an example of an area that, in my view, that the sidewalk would not make a lot of sense to require to be constructed at this time. So I'm supportive of the variance request.
I have a question. I think we had a case before. It was Rudy Construction. I think even the applicant is in the room now, where we went through this about fee in lieu of, and they offered a fee in lieu of. But we had something from engineering at that time that indicated that it was not practical for it to be installed at that time. But we don't have anything from engineering at this time in this report, and I really would like to have something from engineering that sets forth what may be obvious to us by our viewing. That's my only comment.
I tend to agree. I would just like to know about if there are any other feasible options here besides just granting a variance, and what kind of expense would have to be borne to develop a sidewalk there. I'd just like to get a little more clarity in that regard.
I also agree. The problem we've got with granting a variance on a sidewalk is that variance is forever. And so how this use changes in the years to come. They would never be required to install a sidewalk, and the use may change in a way that a sidewalk would be very appropriate, but they wouldn't be required if we grant this variance. So I'm going to be very reluctant to grant the variance. If the fee structure is in place and we can do that, then that would be a consideration, or something from the city engineering that gives us more information.
These are tough cases because, like I said, if you actually read the ordinance, it's one of the few times, in my opinion, where we're given a very clear directive about what to do with sidewalks. I also think that I think I recall the case, even though each case stands on its own. There are instances where it doesn't make a lot of sense to do it, and where you're putting the burden on a private property owner to make improvements to install a sidewalk that really they shouldn't be called to have to make to do that. And the other thing that strikes me about this application that's a little bit unique is this isn't an arterial. Shields Boulevard is a 6-lane divided thoroughfare. It's not, and that actually is in the staff report as well, that it functions more as a highway than an arterial street. We've also seen applications where abutting a highway it didn't make sense to require the sidewalk. And so, I think if we can't, I agree with the comments that if we could impose a fee in lieu of, I'm being told that we can't. So I don't want to sit here and say, oh yeah, we'll do the fee in lieu of, but then really it can't be done, so we've done nothing for them. If you want to add some color to that.
Yeah, my understanding is that we could require the fee in lieu of after granting the variance, but the variance would still be required from the zoning code.
So now we have a chicken or an egg problem. So we can deny the variance, and they wouldn't qualify for fee in lieu of. Essentially, at that point, they'd have to build the sidewalk. Or we can grant the variance, and they would have the option to do fee in lieu of at that point. So am I saying that correctly in your view?
I think you could grant the variance subject to submitting the fee in lieu of. Or grant the variance outright.
can the applicant move to continue this so that the applicant might be able to get something from engineering to show the feasibility of this?
Certainly.
Would you be opposed, this is your case, man, would you be opposed to a continuance to provide better information about the feasibility of constructing the sidewalk?
I have to talk to an engineer, but I mean, this is very simple because the parking lot in our car lot is a detention pond. And whenever it rains, all the water from the whole area comes here. So, I mean, nothing is impossible. We can build a sidewalk, but it is not safe.
Yep. And
so if somebody falls into this ditch and get hurt, then who's going to be sued, city or us?
Yeah, I understand all. I understand your concern. I think for what some of the other board members have voiced, and I agree with that, is that without something that says that you've had an engineer look at this, or the city has looked at this from a public and agrees with your statement that it's not safe, we're just assuming that to be true, and that's a hard position to be in to grant a variance from, which runs with this property forever, which is the concern that they sort of are articulating to you. And I agree with that. To me, it seems like there might be a pretty good argument here that this isn't a good place to put a sidewalk, but I think we need some evidence to substantiate that. So
if I bring a written letter from an engineering, then that would be good?
That would be my recommendation, would be to talk to an engineer and ask them for advice on what you need to bring to us. There's plenty of folks out there, and I think it's fair to say that staff could probably give you some direction about, what you're going to need from their perspective. So if you're not opposed to it, I think a continuance is probably going to be your best outcome here.
And if I'm opposed to it,
then we'll vote on it.
Then you vote on it.
All we have from the staff report is that topography and drainage, and from the pictures, may make installation impracticable. That's not sufficient basis, I don't think, to prove it at this time. So it would be in your best interest to try to get a continuance, get more information that would say it could not be done.
Yeah, if we could take 2 weeks, we'll work with the applicant and with Public Works and see what we can come up with.
Okay.
You're agreeable to that? So 2 weeks would be the April 5th meeting. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. That's our next meeting. So unless there's objection for anyone else here that wanted to be heard on this matter today, I'll take a motion to continue.
I'll move to continue it.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to continue case number 14446 to the April 5th, 2018 meeting. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is continued. Thank you.
Item number 3, case number 14456, request for a variance to the 15-foot side yard setback and 5-foot landscape buffer in the I-1 Light Industrial District, located at 833 Northwest 66th Street.
My name is Sam Gresham, 400 Northwest 23rd, here to represent the owners. We are abutting a vacant lot that's owned by these same owners. At the time that I made application for the original building permit, that it's still R1, and I did not include it in there. I should have probably done that. But in any case, the adjacent property is vacant and zoned R1, and our setback requirement is 15 feet plus a 5-foot landscape buffer, which in this case, this owner is not going to put a house there. I mean, the purpose of this property, and you can see how it's been developed so far, is to rezone it at some point as industrial to follow the pattern of the rest of the neighborhood as it goes further east. Our request is to have you grant a variance, if you can, to allow that empty lot to serve as the 15-foot, as the landscape buffer, as well as the setback from the R1 property.
Board members?
Sounds reasonable to me. Is there any assurance that it stays?
Well, if it gets rezoned, as an R1 property, it doesn't really look like a place where the houses in the neighborhood are not the most attractive. And there's a lot of pressure on a lot of those neighbors to the east. We've already found that out because we were trying to expand the boundaries of this particular development, and have heard that a lot of people are looking at that same opportunity. So our request is to I'm telling you we are going to rezone, but at this point it's impractical from their perspective because it's only 50 feet of additional property. And they did buy it subsequent. They bought the property they own, 100-foot side, and then they bought the 50 feet just shortly thereafter. So it's just a new development, let's say, in this.
Here's what I'll say. This is an interesting one because this area, we've seen a lot of cases in this area for a variety of different reasons. It's kind of it's just an interesting part of town, but it's a lot of transition going on. There's some office development going on over here, some light industrial development, which is what you're up to, and then some older homes. And the one thing that I think is unique about the application is that the buffer was there and the separation is there to prevent an immediate, incompatibility of uses in adjacency, and you don't have it. And I think when this industrial property is developed, someone who would come along and want to buy that residential lot is really on notice of the abutting use. And so the landscape buffer, the requirement to separate that, to me, it doesn't, you're not altering the intent of the ordinance here. And I think to say that area, it is unlikely to develop as residential, I think is probably fair. Somebody might argue with that, but I think it's fair and reasonable. So I do wonder, and I have to ask, why not rezone the property as a part of that?
Our application is in at this point, and they had a choice, either shorten their building by 15 feet or buy that adjacent property. And they bought it, and they paid a real premium for it.
Yeah.
At this point, it's developed, a plan that we'd already sort of committed to with respect to the building that we're putting on that site.
So while there's no assurance the rezoning is going to be granted, you've filed the application to rezone the property?
We did not file the application
to rezone
the property, but it is still R1, and it's still, it owned by the same owner. So the question is, can you consider that? Given what he paid for it, no one's going to put a house on that site. I would not. It's a hard argument to make because it's not, I agree, it's not something that I can prove would never happen. But as you say, it's something that if there was someone who did choose to buy it from him at whatever premium he'd charge, we're in excess of $100,000 for 50 feet. That's a lot more than the value of any of those properties adjacent. The idea of someone coming in and buying it with the knowledge that they're right up against an industrial property, it seemed to me that they'd sort of buy it with that knowledge, if that were the case. But that's not a very strong argument, is it? But in this case, his ownership is expressly for the purpose of avoiding the 15-foot setback.
Yeah, I get it. They're trying to maximize.
And his rezoning would be his next step. If you guys turned us down today, he would have to just simply rezone it. And the process is 3 months, as you know. The expense is not significant, but it would be the time that would be more significant for these owners.
Board members?
I'd like to ask staff on this. It says you have a favorable consideration that the applicant owns the property. It's not very, it's very unlikely the residential structure will ever be located on the R1 zone property. Is that based on your observations?
Yeah, new development in this area is all trending toward industrial. Most of the applications we've had in this area are for industrial rezoning.
Is there anyone else who wants to be heard on this matter today? If not, and there's no more discussion, I'd take a motion.
I find that the applicant has met statutory standards for a variance request, that there are conditions peculiar to this particular property, and that no hardship or detriment to the public would be caused. Therefore, I'd make a motion to approve the application.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve case number 14456. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you very much.
Item number 4, case number 14457, request for a variance to the platted 40-foot building setback in the PUD 718 district located at 11828 Mill Hollow Court.
Good afternoon. Tim Johnson with Johnson & Associates here on behalf of the applicant. We prepared this plat some 10 years ago, and, you know, it was a flip of a coin which side your setback would go on. In this particular case, the 40-foot was on the north side and the 15-foot on the west side, and what we're proposing is to swap that in this application. And the basis for that is that, get this where I can read it, sorry. So this is the side that's currently 15, we're going to move it to 40. This portion of the property drops about 8 feet to the street. Over where they want to put the driveway to access the house, it's very, very flat. The purpose of this is that the Van Hoos family has a handicapped daughter that's in their full custody, will be in a wheelchair the rest of her life, and they are building this new house to give her her own space in the house, and this makes it much more accessible for her to come and go, get the mail, be able to take her powered wheelchair to the street and go for a stroll. And we've reached out to a few of the neighbors. I have not talked to too many of them specifically, but it's a very nice home, a very large home that's going on these 2 lots. So with the request to allow that, the front yards to swap, it doesn't really change anything in the neighborhood because the homes are either 15-foot back or 40-foot back. And
when you say it was a coin flip, essentially, are you talking about because the way the street wraps around,
right,
how you orient the house would determine your front yard or your side yard? Yeah.
And because of we did that on instead of a 90-degree turn, it was a curved street. You know, it would have been nice if the whole front setback around the curve was maybe 20 feet instead of the 40, but we were adhering to the RA zoning requirement at the time under the PUD. So.
Board members, questions of the applicant?
Anybody else here to speak? Any neighbors?
Anyone else who wanted to be heard on this matter today?
Yeah, that was my only concern, is whether there was some kind of purpose behind a longer setback here, a larger setback near the cul-de-sac, and it sounds like there's not. And so, given that, I mean, I tend to support the application.
Sounds like a motion.
Move to support and approve item number 14475 for the reasons that it satisfies the statutory standards required.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve case number 14457. Please cast your votes, please.
Thank you.
And the application is approved.
Item number 5, case number 14458, request for a variance to the required number of parking spaces, the drive aisle, width, queuing, and maneuvering, 15-foot rear yard building setback, and 5-foot landscape buffer in the C3 Community Commercial District and HL Historic Landmark Overlay located at 420 Northwest 30th Street.
I'm Michaela Mattingly. I'm the property owner. This is the architect that's helping me on the case, so he'll probably do most of the speaking. But I bought this property.
Ma'am, so sorry. This is so silly, but will you give us your address too, just for the record?
420 Northwest 30th Street.
Thank you.
This property is in a historic district, but the whole block is zone commercial. So it's already zone commercial, but I'm wanting to use it for commercial use for retail purposes. And since it's in a historic part of town, there's really not a ton of options for parking. I've already gone before the historic committee, and we proposed putting it out front, and obviously that was shot down because it would change the historic nature of the property too much. So they approved putting parking in the back. And so now I'm here before you guys asking to give me a variance on a lot of stuff.
If it makes you feel better, if there was ever like an exam question,
yeah,
for like if you can sit on the Board of Adjustment, I think this would be the exam question.
Richard Starks, 109 West Broadway, Blanchard, Oklahoma. So it's an interesting situation because no matter what we do, we're going to violate a rule somewhere. So we're gonna, try to comply with everything from the historic, and that limits us to parking in the back. Currently, it's a duplex, and it was built residential, and now it's zoned commercial. So we need to comply with that parking requirement, and it's pretty much impossible. So the existing drive is not wide enough, and in the bottom right-hand corner of the site plan, there's a garage, an existing garage, and we were attempting to count that as 2 parking spaces, but they don't comply. That could be for, owner and anyone else who was employed, so it would be like an employee parking. And then that would leave us 2 other spots, and then a 2-spot bike rack. That was our approach to it. So we don't really meet the requirements for the parking count either. So
this is a unique a case as I think I've ever seen since I've been on the board. I would note that I believe in part the Historic Preservation recommended approval because you're intending to maintain the existing historic structure, which is ultimately their focus. And you're zoned for the use that you intend to have, and it's been zoned that way. Do you have any idea how long it's been zoned that way? A long time.
I bought it like 2 years ago.
Well, without knowledge, I would assume that this is just it's essentially a relic of something that was zoned this way a long time ago. It wasn't built to accommodate it, but I think it's really hard for us to not allow a use, not give you a path where you can use the property the way it's zoned for your intended purpose. Normally, when you start out with, needing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variances, you got a real uphill battle. But I do support your application because I don't see another path for you forward, and I think the items of the variance are very clearly met here, particularly conditions that are peculiar to the particular piece of property involved.
Thank you for your understanding.
Board members, other comments or
I
questions?
had some questions for the applicant, if you could come back. You gave your address as this property address.
Yes.
Are you going to live in one side?
No, initially I was going to, and then we found out it'd just be a lot easier to make the whole thing commercial.
The sprinkling requirement? You'd have to sprinkle the residential half of it because it'd be residential and commercial in one building. So we kind of went away from that idea. But that was the initial. So both sides would be commercial.
And I don't know the nature of the business that you intend to put there, but your parking is limited, and you've got a driveway where only one car can pass at a time. I mean, you've got some issues, I think, that you're going to have to confront. The other thing, too, is that, depending on how many customers you draw, you may have some people walking half a block across the neighbors' lawns or, encroaching on the commercial parking across the street and crossing 30th Street safely. I'm just saying that I think, I admire your desire to do this. But I think, definitely there's some challenges that you're going to confront.
Oh, I'm opening a small retail shop. It'll mostly be art and then some clothing with it. It's
Is it
right by
kind
the
of consistent with the Pacific
Yeah,
Arts
yes.
District and that kind of merchandise and that kind of demographic?
Correct.
Okay.
That was one question I had. I didn't see it here, and I looked at some of the stuff from Historic Preservation. I didn't see the use, but it's going to be art and T-shirts, you said?
Yes, correct.
I think the use matters if it's, someplace where people are going to park and stay for 5 hours compared to a coffee shop where people are going to be coming and going all the time. Use does matter.
I totally agree, but to be fair, it could be this shop one day, and the fact that it's zoned straight C3, it could be a coffee shop tomorrow. So, I mean, there are some issues with that, but I think the real issue is do you want to go in? If you look at the block pattern, the whole block is zone C3. So to have them go through a rezoning process or something to put this into an SPUD or something, I don't think that makes any sense at all. I think it confuses the zoning of the block. Who knows what happens long term, but there's really no other way to make use of the property because you technically can't live there. So
I was going to ask, too, part of the notification for this hearing would have been to the club and restaurant across the street, and there was nobody here that represented them or that may want to be heard.
Matt Guillory, 401 Northwest 30th. I am across the street. I'm not the club or the restaurant. I own the building across the street and the parking lot across the street. I mean, I agree. It's kind of a rock and a hard place situation here. It's zoned for that use. You can't really prevent that. It's not really set up for the parking. Obviously, my concern is people parking on my property. And then the bigger concern is long-term. I mean, there are 6 residential properties along this strip of 30th that are all zoned commercial at this point, and I believe 1 or 2 of them are empty completely, and then the other ones are all, well, 3 of them are empty, I think, completely, because one of them is obviously under construction. And then 3 of them are being used as residential at this point. As that starts to shift, which I think it probably will, this is probably the first domino to fall of those 6 houses, we're going to need some sort of a plan to address parking for those 6. You figure even if each house only averages 800 to 1,000 square feet, you're looking at 6,000 square feet of commercial space with virtually no parking. So it would be great. I mean, I know this is not possible right now because there are multiple property owners, but it would be great if something could be done like the development on 23rd Street with Cuppies and Joe's, where the backyards of those residential houses all got turned into parking, and you could have different driveways, service, ingress and egress, and things like that. Especially, like you said, it's C3, so you know the likelihood of something like a coffee shop or cupcakes or anything like that is pretty high, I would think.
A curiosity is the area, I mean, I know a little bit of developed property west of this too. Does the area have even an informal kind of property owners group, or?
No, we've been kind of going back and forth about this. This came up in front of HP 3 or 4 different times. One of the things that Alan Brown from HP kept suggesting or saying is that we really need some sort of a master plan for the area, because in addition to these 6 houses that are zoned commercial and not used commercial, you have a 14,000 square foot church that has been empty for a number of years that at some point will get developed. I have part of my building that is still being underutilized, that is in the process of that's not going to stay that way forever. And then Joy Reed Belt owns the rest of the north side of the street there, and she has 10 to 12,000 square feet of underutilized space along that same block too. So all in all, you're looking at probably 35,000 square feet of underutilized space, none of which has any parking. So there does need to be some sort of a master plan. There's not a process in place for that right now. There are multiple different property owners, and most of them are using it as residential. So there's no obvious way to do that plan right now.
I have some questions. Are you here to just talk about the area, or are you here to protest? Or what are you?
No, I'm not really here to protest. I'm here just to kind of see how it goes and make sure that something logical comes out of this. I'm not going to protest because I don't see how I would protest her using her property for the way it's zoned.
And the staff had indicated that the application of the ordinance to this particular property would create an unnecessary hardship. Do you have any different opinion about that?
In terms of creating a hardship? Not that I'm aware of. I mean, like I said, as long as people aren't parking on my property, because I have limited parking space also, so I need it for my tenants. I'm actually really in favor of those 6 houses being turned into commercial. I think it makes more sense. It's a fairly busy little strip of 30th. The other thing to take into consideration with regard to parking here is parking is technically allowed on the street, on that stretch of 30th. It's probably not the wisest thing to park. There have been cars over the years. I've owned my property for about 10 years now, 11 years, and 2 or 3 different times over that period of time, cars that are parked on 30th have been hit while they were parked by people. People have a tendency to go rather quickly down 30th right there.
Yeah, 30th really, to say that it's a neighborhood street is not an accurate description. Even in this stretch east of kind of the Paseo, it's still not accurate. I'm with you. I agree. I think the issue is I'm not sure who's going to spearhead that. Right? I mean, there are times people come before us and they say, well, we want to use the property this way, and it's very obvious to say, well, go get rezoned. Again, here, there's not a reason to go through that. They don't have a clear path that makes sense for the city to direct them through. So a variance to me seems very appropriate.
Right.
Having said that, I think it's going to come down to the property owners in the area coming together to try to make sure that there's some direction for the area long term, because it's the parking problem they're going to face, you're going to face, everybody's going to face it.
Right.
But there's nothing that the city can do to control it, because if the person in one of these other homes wants to use their property as a commercial business, short of them needing a variance, they can go pull a permit and operate as long as they meet, and there's nothing the city can do, even if it makes
The 2 last things I'll say is I don't know how many spots are required. I don't really know what the square footage of this property is, so I don't know how many spots would be required under code. I don't know if the decision to keep the garage negatively impacts the number of spots they could fit into the backyard. The backyard is large, but I don't really know enough about the layout to know whether or not as you said before, what HP wants to do is preserve the historic, and I think they were in favor of keeping the garage, although it was half falling down and not very historic. Keeping that garage may negatively impact the number of spots that you can fit on that property. So from practical terms, if the trade-off is keep the garage for HP purposes or have a more appropriate or a more workable amount of parking spaces, I would be in favor of a more practical number of parking spaces. The other thing is that the next door neighbor did mention at one of the meetings that she'd be open to having parking in her backyard also. I don't know if anything ever came of that. I don't know if it was something that was thought out or if she just threw it out off the cuff there. But that would obviously get us going in the direction of turning the whole back of that strip into parking.
Yeah. Well, your comments are appreciated. I think just to answer your question, the parking available for the site, they are providing 3 standard parking spaces and 1 handicap space. What they would have been required to provide by code without the variance would have been 5 parking spaces and 1 handicap space, so they're essentially down 2 parking spaces.
Okay.
So, but thank you for your comments. I hope you guys will exchange information.
Yeah, and we have.
Okay.
Like I said, I'm not here to oppose.
Yeah.
I'm just, kind of worried about the long term.
Understood.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else who wants to be here on this matter today? Board members, other comments or questions?
I know from personal experience, you park where it's easiest to get in and out, and I'm a culprit in this respect. When I go to A1 Vacuum to drop off the vacuum to be serviced, it's easier for me to pull into Baskin-Robbins parking than it is to navigate into their tight spot. And what I expect will happen is if your business thrives, that people will be tempted to park across the street if those spaces are open. And I think what Scott said and what this gentleman said, communicating and being good neighbors and being considerate of each other, I think is going to be important in terms of all of you coexisting, because this is an area where you're likely to see more of this activity. Parking is going to become a future challenge even more than it is now. So be considerate of each other. I'm going to support your application.
Sound like a motion.
Any other discussion?
I just wanted to mention that there was a long hearing before HP and Historical Preservation, and they did, after hearing hearing everything, and I listened to it, they did recommend that that the board approve these variances.
All right, my finding is case 14205, I'm going to support the application for the reasons that the applicant has met the statutory standards for a peculiar piece of property that enjoys those peculiar standards and that it will not cause a substantial detriment to the public good. Therefore, I'd make a motion to approve the application.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve the variances for case number 14458. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved. Good luck.
Item number 6, case number 14459, request for a variance to the minimum 10-foot rear and 5-foot side yard building setback to permit accessory structures in the R1 single-family residential district located at 1222 Northwest 20th and 1225 Northwest 19th Street.
Good afternoon, Mason Schwartz, 522 Colcord Drive, on behalf of the applicant. The applicant owns both of those lots to the north and the south. It is Lot 4 and Lot 5. They are seeking to construct home improvements and 2 new garages. To do that, they're going to need side yard and rear yard setbacks. Kind of a peculiar arrangement with the lot configuration. Normally, the 10-foot rear yard setback would be problematic to take a variance from because of the 20-foot platted utility easement that would run along the back of these. However, due to the lot split that was previously done with these, the reconfiguration of the lots allows them to construct the garages on both the north lot and the south lot without encroaching on that 20-foot utility easement. However, they still have the, by code, 10-foot setback. We think that in regards to the 10-foot setback, the statutory conditions are met, primarily because the owner owns both lots abutting each other, and so the kind of protected property is owned on both sides. Same thing really applies with the 5-yard interior setback. If you look at the south lot, the kind of panhandle shape on the east side there is, again, kind of a funky outcome due to the lot configuration from the lot split. However, again, those 5 feet that are to the east of that garage are owned, again, by the same owner. So we are not aware of any protests. We, I think, did submit some letters of support and happy to ask for your approval.
When did the lot split occur, do you know?
It wasn't too long ago. I think it was in the last couple of years.
Was the owner the one who did the lot split?
Correct, yes.
So this was essentially, I'm guessing, originally one home and then like a guest house or something like that, and they came in and split the lot in half?
Well, I think both of the homes on both lots have been there for, well, I know the one on the south has been there for a long time. And they did the split. I'm really not sure exactly why they did the split. We weren't involved at that point. But I do know the 2 main homes have been there for, I think, the one on the south since like 1910 or something.
So is the intention to redevelop them and then sell one of them? Is that the idea?
I don't know what the intention is with as to selling and whatnot, but
there were some letters of support that indicated that this was supposed to be their primary residence.
Yes, I know that at least one of them is a primary residence. I would have to check on the other one, but I do know the one on the south, they're taking that down to the studs and just redoing it again. It's been there for a good number of years.
Okay. Board members, other questions for the applicant? Is there anyone else that wants to be heard on this matter today? If none and there's no more discussion, I'll take a motion.
I'd move approval.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second to approve case number 14459. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Thank you.
Item number 7, case number 14460, request for a variance to the required number of parking spaces in the I-2 Moderate Industrial District located at 131 Northeast 37th Street.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Randy Gross, 6301 Waterford Boulevard, representing the applicant and owner, HMS LLC. Just to tell you very quickly about our application, I want to tell you a little bit about the company and then a little bit about the property. This is an orthopedic distributor, so if you or someone you know has had a hip, knee, or shoulder replacement, that part has probably come through either the applicant or some company like the applicant. That being said, they're not just selling those, but usually a representative from the applicant will be present in the surgery. So what you have is about 10 employees in this building, and it was recently purchased by them. At any one time, you're lucky to have maybe 5 employees that are present in the building. They want to bump out some of the usable space for office, mainly work area, that being kind of conference room, things like that. Right now it has one very small office and then just kind of an open room where they're set up in kind of Thanksgiving-style tables where they all sit around and they'd like to spread out a little bit. Because of that, it has hit the requirement for additional parking. Right now there's 12 regular parking spots, 1 handicap. So we are 7 short after they make those improvements. So we're here asking your approval for a variance. Of course, like I said, this is not a retail establishment. They don't have visitors that come in and out. The parking suits their needs, and believe that it will, their plan is to be there long term. And again, because of the nature of this building in this area, this is not something that we think will ever develop into some sort of retail area or things of that nature. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Board members?
Could we condition a variance, an approval on this use so that if the building changed hands in the future and the use changed, then the variance would not carry over?
You could, or you could also condition the variance on this particular building configuration, the floor plan, the amount of office versus
So that if they ever went back and it changed hands and they wanted to do an interior remodel, the variance would not apply?
If it was a remodel that would require more parking, no, it would not.
The objective is to not create a forever variance that, depending on what future use of that building happened, that they would be able to use it.
Well, the applicant understands and would agree to some sort of conditional variance based upon the current remodel plans.
That's the first thing I have written down here, is whether, if we could condition this, then I'd probably support it.
Is there anyone else who wants to be heard on this matter today? If not,
Make the motion, I'll second.
Sure. I make a motion to approve case number 14460, the reasons that it meets the statutory standards.
With the condition, we want to put a condition on that?
Sure, with the condition that it's set up for this particular configuration. And are you conditioning that on use as well?
Is that the proper way to present the motion? Okay. Second.
Are you comfortable with that? Okay. So I have a motion and a second to approve the variance for case number 14460, so long as the building maintains the configuration as submitted in the permit request. Please cast your votes, please. The application is approved.
Thank you very much.
Item number 8, case number 14461, request for a variance to the required 10-foot rear yard building setback in the R1 single-family residential district located at 10609 South Harvey Avenue.
Hello, my name is Tom Jenkins, 10609 South Harvey Avenue. I purchased the property mid last year, and the building in question was already there. And talking to neighbors, it's been there since at least 17 years ago. One neighbor said, I've lived there 17 years. It's been there as long as she has. And as far as anybody else knows, it was built when the home was built. It's a secondary garage / shop when I bought the house. In applying for a remodel permit, we wanted to add a couple of ceiling fans and some plumbing. We found out that the building had never been permitted in the beginning when it was built. so we could not get a remodel permit. We were asked to come to the Board of Adjustments. And with, in talking to the board, I went and got a certification that the building is built to code. I have that from Robert Zoll as an engineer, and so I paid for an engineer to come out and he checked the depth of the slab and the insulation and all of that, and it is built to home standards. I have a copy of that if you need that. So the variance that we're looking for is that the building is only 5 feet from the back property line. It should have been 10 when it was built. However, I've talked to all of the neighbors. Matter of fact, they were here earlier today, and they said they have no problems with me remodeling the building and getting a variance. The property line between myself and my 2 neighbors on either side of me, there are no utilities back there now. They actually tried to get utilities several years ago when one house down the street had caught fire and petitioned for city utilities, and they were denied at that time. So there are no utilities there. There are no plans for utilities. There's no overhead utilities. The way our properties are set up is on my street on Harvey, it's, lots behind me, as you can see with the big round circle drive. That's one big property all along there. And so we're just asking for the variance that the building be allowed to stay there, because tearing it down obviously would cost the homeowner quite a bit of money to have that building removed. And again, I understand the conditions of a variance, that if utilities were ever put there, that I would be liable to take care of those expenses at that time. I'm comfortable with that because I don't see there ever being a need for utilities in that area.
Board members?
I'm going to support the application.
Just for clarification, was it 6, how much is the variance? How many feet were you?
My building is more or less 5 foot. It's right in that 5 foot.
5 to 6?
5 foot.
And there's no change externally to the building itself?
No.
With the remodel?
Not at all.
I don't think we have in our file I see an inspection, but you talked about some certificate.
I got an engineer certification.
Oh, okay.
This is the engineer who came out and did an inspection and verified that the slab was compliant and that there was a stem wall. If no more discussion, I would make a motion to approve case 14461, that the applicant has met the statutory standards for a variance request.
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second to approve the variance for case number 14461. Please cast your votes, please. And the application is approved.
Back to permits. Thank you all very much. What amount of time do I need to wait before I can go and get my remodeling permit?
10 days.
10 days. Okay, thank you.
Well, I did away with my cover sheet. Thank you, Laura. Additional items, communications and reports, citizens to be heard, or other business. Going once, going twice. I would take a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
And we are adjourned.